went to test preparation. So instead of getting into this critical discussion of what the word ghetto means, or the geographical location of a ghetto, or even the discourse that we use on a regular basis, like that's so ghetto or that's so gay to mean bad, right? She didn't go there. She just went right to test preparation. Okay, we have denotative and connotative. Denotative is a real meaning from the dictionary. And then she has 2 kids look it up. And connotative is like, you dress so ghetto, so ugly, so cholo, ugly. The Jews were sent to the ghetto. And then they passed out the books and they read silently. So instead of creating this environment where they get involved in this discourse, in this discussion of through a very critical perspective, right? She could have done a lot of things with this conversation. Just talked about ghettos, just talked about this disparity of wealth, why do ghettos exist? Talking about cholos, talking about the way that we use language, right? But she didn't go there. She just went into test preparation.
Was was Ms. G insider in regards to their own cultural background?
That's a good question, because most of the teachers, including the principal and the administrative principal, the assistant principal, I always say administrative, were all from the same area. Ms. G was not. Ms. G, most of the teachers in that particular school are U.S. citizens born in Mexico, who have experienced a lot of the same things that the kids have gone through. Ms. G was a Chicana. She was a Mexican-American born in the United States, and she wasn't from El Paso. So that's a very interesting that you say that, because that's exactly what we saw too. And then we have an example of a teacher who was from there, who is an exemplary teacher. And Ms. O, she is from the area. She is a transfronteriza herself. And she really relates well to the kids. The kids love her. But again, going back, and I don't know if maybe this is not the teachers, but the test preparation pressures that we are so involved in the schools now, that this happened in her class. And they were discussing the law of April 6th of 1830, passed by the Mexican government to Texas settlers. And so, what language did they speak in Texas? Ariela. English. And so they spoke Spanish. And Ariela they spoke Spanish. She's intrigued, surprised. And so yes, but it was Mexico. Everyone spoke Spanish and Spanish only. Back then, Mexicans were asking Americans to speak Spanish. It was backwards from now. Let's continue, because we're wasting too much time on side conversations. So from this conversation, they went directly into, again, test preparation. Again, to Mrs. O's credit, they were taking a social studies exam the following day. So she felt a lot of pressure. So we have to really think, is it really the teachers, or is it that test preparation that really creates all this pressure in teachers? Just something to think about. But if you look at this example, there's a lot of critical conversations that could have been had in the classroom by the teachers. English only laws.
So when you write up your findings, do you put that in there? Do you say, it could be due to the pressure teacher you do?
Yes, and when we analyze, and it's nice to work in a team because we all see things a little bit differently, but we talk about it and we think, well, yeah, maybe, because we don't want to go into that deficit perspective of teachers, right, and blame teachers for everything without looking at the structure of the school and what's going on in the structure of the whole country. Anything? And then possibilities and reinventions. Now we're at the point where this is our 3rd year. We're finishing the study in this particular school, but there's so much going on that we feel like we need to go through that IRB again and extend it and extend the research. We want to include one school from Las Cruces and one school from Columbus, New Mexico, which is also on the border. And I think that it'll be very interesting to see the findings from the school in Las Cruces and see how the little bit of distance, 32 miles from the border, if that makes a difference or not. We also plan and implement teachers. We plan and implement teacher seminars to that, so we're still at that stage where we need to take all this information and share it with the teachers from this particular school and maybe from the district also, so that it's very important for us that we give it back what we took, right? And then we need to share this data with pre-service teachers both here at MSU and at Utah. And I think that's it. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm thinking of it from the teacher whose room you were in's perspective. And so when you write it up or you present it, or even when you just give it back to them, do you tell them this was a lost opportunity for you? I mean, how do they respond to that if you do say it that way?
And that's something that me and the team are talking about doing, because
it feels like they made all this, they trust you.
Yeah.
And then
and we don't want to share it in the way that we point at teachers. This teacher's doing this teacher. We want to share the information in the way that this is what we saw in different classrooms. And then work with teachers to create a plan of action and see where we go from there. Yeah, because I see what you're saying. It's like they're never going to want us back.
Right?
So are there conversations that happen in between? I mean, I know you're publishing your research, but you're in the school, you know the principal and all the administrators, teachers. Do they ask for feedback in the moment or during the school year? Are there conversations that happen, or you go and you gather your data and you leave?
We talk a lot with the teachers, especially the one teacher that we follow the students. We've become fairly close with her. So with her, we do share a lot of the data. The other teachers, we only work with them very briefly. But Miss O is the one that we really have worked with the 3 years. So with her, we share a lot of things through email, or we get together with her after class or before class or whenever there's time to get together with her. Yes. With the other teachers, we do talk to them, but not as much as with Miss O. But she's the one that we've really, really worked with the 3 years. Yes.
The next to the last slide about the lost opportunities. I was just wondering, do you ever focus on the found opportunities or the opportunities that are positive? Do you have some slides to, I mean,
you know what? We don't.
I don't mean right now, but
right.
Do you actually bring that out too?
We do. We have right now. We have 3 articles based on literacy studies and how teachers are using literacy very well in the classroom, and 1 article on science. Now we need to go to social studies, but it's so hard. It's been so hard to get examples of social studies because social studies seems like it's not being taught enough in the classroom. So we've had a really hard time with social studies. We have a lot of examples of what you're talking about in science. We have a lot of examples in language arts, and especially with Miss O. Miss O is an exemplary teacher. She just has this rapport with the students. She uses some amazing strategies in the class. She integrates curriculum very well. Language and science integrated with social studies. So we have a lot of solid examples.
I could just see how it would be hard for, if they knew your research, if it went in another direction, to kind of bring in a lot of negative examples. I think it would be hard for them to either let you back in or anybody else back in. Right. And so that's why I was wondering how you will handle that, that type of thing.
No, and I think there's very few examples of negative.
But you know what that does? That really shows the pressure that all teachers are under. And so it is a true paints a true story, number one. And number two, it might even give her cause to reflect a little bit, like we all need to do as teachers, where you go, I did say that. Or, you know what I mean? It may not necessarily be a negative thing, because it might even be something really good for administration or somebody higher up to see, the pressure that we're putting on you guys, this is what's happening.
Right, and especially with Miss O, who is such a good teacher, but even she she's feeling those pressures of the
Exactly,
test,
yeah.
and she's very good about not falling into the
Right.
test pressures. But in this particular case, because she was testing the next day on social studies, maybe she's felt that pressure in this end. But you're right, I think we also need to share those stories where we need to look at how this testing is creating these
Doing.
lost opportunities, right?
But
How did you choose your participants? What's the criteria for choosing your participants?
We chose the classroom.
Randomly, or it's depend in their academic, or?
We chose the whole classroom. We chose the
The
whole
whole-
classroom
Oh.
because it was close to the border and because that particular classroom had a large number of transfronterizo students. And then we interviewed all the students in the classroom in little folds.
Okay, because I thought you pick only 60 students. Or not?
Right, individual classrooms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was classroom by classrooms. Yeah.
Jay, why don't you go first?
Oh, I was gonna say, I was curious looking ahead into, it is, I think an element of it is testing. But I was curious, as you move into Las Cruces and Columbus, where there's pressure on the test here in New Mexico, but not to the extent that Texas is. I'm curious as to how would that change your conclusions if you found that those critical conversations were still not taking place?
Well, and I think that's something that we also need to think about, right? That it is still very hard for teachers to have those critical conversations in the classroom. A lot of teachers don't want to have those critical conversations.
Right.
They're willing to talk about social studies, but then not through a critical perspective. And I think that needs to be said, right? We need to pay attention to that.
Yes.
Why are teachers still not willing to have these critical lessons in their classrooms, to incorporate that critical perspective that gets students involved in that critical dialogue, to talk about race and class and gender and heterosexism and queer theories, right? So it's not happening still in a lot of cases, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Big
I agree.
assumption.
That's why I would bring
Yeah.
that up. But having taught here, I think it's not necessarily just test. I mean, it's not far from your theory that it's test-related pressure, but I also think it's like kind of media-presented pressure on teachers that there are certain subjects that are taboo, regardless of whether they're on the test or not. And I think this just happens to be, especially because of the area, one that tends to avoid that. I mean, that was a great. As a teacher, as a history teacher who would have an idea, a different style of learning theory that I would use in the classroom, that would be an excellent conversation you could have about Spanish and Texas at that time and still get to the test prep.
Exactly.
But I think it's just one of those things where it's not an accepted learning theory.
Sure. And I think that maybe that's where we need to think about interviewing some of the teachers we worked with a little bit further and ask them some of those questions. Show them an example and then ask them, why did you not go into English only laws, or
Right.
or what else could you done with this? Maybe they're not realizing it because they're pressured with time, with tests, with a lot of things, right? So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask a question that has maybe like 3 or 4 components. And the reason for that question is that I want, hopefully your answer will shed some light on the chapters that my student referred to this class. So basically you identified a site, the school, where you wanted to do the study, right? And you selected your participant based on your research agenda, okay? And you collected the data, okay? And so I would like to know, mostly for the class, how do you make sense of the data? How do you code the data? How do you make sense of the data that you collected? As you know, when you do new research, you may have a lot of data, but that doesn't mean you're going to use all of it, right? So how did you code it? How did you figure out what was important for you from the data? How did you select the pieces from the data that you collected? That's one. Second question, how did you come up with your conceptual framework? What made you decide to draw on critical risk theory? Is that something that you had in mind before going to the school to do your research? Or is it something that you decided to do after you collected the data, interacting with the students, then you figure out, okay, this is the theory that I want to draw on. And third, how was it for you when you first got to decide? How did you negotiate your relationship with the teacher? And lastly, what I would like you to share with us, I'm trying to cover what's been argued in the chapters so that she can help you better understand what you read, if you did not quite understand what you read. I guess those 3 questions, if you could shed some light on them, that would be great.
Okay, we did open coding. So we took all our data when we started to analyze, we did color coding. So we got together as a team. Each one of us would read individually. We looked through the data, we analyzed our data, and we color coded individually. And then we got together as a team, and we talked about the different codes that each of us had. And it seemed like all 4 of us would have the same themes emerge. So we did emerging themes. And from all the themes that started to emerge, we started to read up on, we went back and reread the data. And now we looked even more closely for this particular themes that we already had. So once we had our themes, we started to create our sub-themes from those particular themes. So as we were looking at our data, let's say we saw violence. The theme of violence came up a lot. So that became one of our themes, our major themes, violence. But then when we went back to analyze the data again, because we went over and over and over the data so many times, and we kept looking at new things all the time. From that rereading of the data, we started to create sub-themes. So under the theme